Good afternoon, Pacific Tigers. Thank you for joining this edition of Pacific Conversations. My name is Scott Biederman. I'm the Vice President for Development and Alumni Relations and a proud double Tiger. We're joining you today from a biological lab in our Biological Sciences building with Professor Chris Torres. We're excited to have him as our guest. He's received a lot of national acclaim since coming to Pacific. We'll learn a little bit more about it. But I'll tell you a little bit more about him before we launch into our conversation. As I referenced, Professor Torres teaches in our biological sciences here at Pacific and is a bird paleontologist, which, after talking with him, you're a rare bird, so to speak here. His research explores the evolution of bird skulls. Yes, you heard me correctly. Bird skulls and brains, how birds interact with their environments through feeding and senses, what happens when birds lose the ability to fly, which we'll talk a little bit about with what you discovered, and the factors that drive extinction. He studies a wide range of bird species, from flamingos, which we'll show you some today, to prehistoric birds across different periods in Earth's history. His fieldwork has taken him to far-off places such as Patagonia, Madagascar, and Antarctica. Welcome, Chris, to Pacific Conversations.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
So tell us, this is your first year,
Yes.
first year teaching at Pacific.
Yes.
How did it go, and what brought you to Pacific?
It was a blast. It was incredibly fun. It went by scary fast, which I think is a good thing. No, it was a lot of fun, and the expectation of the experience I actually had is why I came here. I think UOP, this department in particular, is unique in the sense of the faculty here are incredibly active in terms of their research, and that research is involves student participation on a really deep level. And that is a major philosophy of mine, as I think that my research requires involvement from students to be done well. And that, combined with the fact that the student body here is incredibly engaged with classwork, but also with research, it's this incredible combination of factors. And when I first visited, that's what it felt like. And so that's what really sealed the deal when it came for me deciding that this was the kind of place I wanted to be. And the experience I've had has been exactly that, which has been great.
So tell us a little bit about your background. So where are you from? And
Yeah.
We've talked a little bit before this conversation.
Sure.
You progressively migrated, we're
Yes.
using bird terms for him,
Yes.
migrated west.
Right.
So tell us a little bit about your background and your interest in
Yes.
all the stuff that we have here, you know,
Yes.
skulls and birds.
Yeah. So I was always a dinosaur kid. And so when I did my undergrad and then master's in North Carolina, which is where I'm from, initially I just wanted to study dinosaurs because I think they're really interesting. And then professors were able to bring me into their lab and give me experiences, which really informed the kind of lab that I'm trying to create here. And I was able to explore birds as living dinosaurs. Birds are living dinosaurs. And so they represent an opportunity to study dinosaurs that are still alive. And when that connected with me, it was birds all the way from then on.
That's interesting. Many people don't connect those two. A dinosaur is a bird's a living dinosaur.
Bird is literally a living dinosaur. And they're still around, but they were around when all of the other dinosaurs were around as well. It's just the birds survived when no other dinosaurs did. And so I think that's really interesting. And so getting to study things that are as old as T-Rex, but that have descendants today, T-Rex doesn't. And so I get to make those connections in a way that you can't with any other kind of dinosaur. That really kind of sealed the deal for me. And
So that leads us to the discovery.
Yeah.
So if you read our Pacific Magazine, Nature, New York Times, you're quoted, right? We have a Pacific faculty member quoted for finding say it for me.
Vagavus ei.
Vagavus ei. Okay, the oldest known bird skull.
Oldest known modern bird skull.
Okay, modern bird skull.
Yes.
So tell us about that discovery and what it means. And you have some kind of examples you can show us too.
Yes. So when I said modern, the reason why I clarified that is because modern birds are the only lineage of dinosaurs that survived this big mass extinction event that happened 66 million years ago. An asteroid the size approximately of Mount Everest struck off the coast of Mexico, triggering a mass extinction event that killed off all of the dinosaurs except modern birds. And so there's certain features that we look at when we see modern birds, features of the skull, features of the brain, that only they had, that no other known dinosaur, including other pre-modern or primitive birds, they didn't have those things either.
Mm.
And so what we understand about how bird evolution has unfolded is that in the immediate aftermath of that mass extinction event, birds exploded. They diversified insanely quickly. In the blink of a geologic eye, they were everywhere, occupying virtually every habitat they occupy now, every ecology, every shape, every major lineage was already here within an incredibly short time after that mass extinction event. And so that was huge. And that has largely shaped the world, at least the terrestrial above water world that we see in the world today. But we know from genetic data that modern birds pre-existed that mass extinction event. They were around with other dinosaurs. They were around with other birds, but they were the only ones that survived. But as much as we know about what happened to those modern birds after that mass extinction, how they responded, we know almost nothing about what they were like before. And that's because we basically don't have any fossils of them. It's this ongoing mystery. Where are fossils of modern birds before that moment in time? We have fossils from a ton of other kinds of dinosaurs, from a bunch of other kinds of birds, pre-modern or primitive birds. But the number of fossils that have been suggested to be modern birds, I could hold in my hands.
Why do you think that is?
It is unclear. Part of it is that they were just much more rare than they are today. Today, they are arguably the dominant terrestrial vertebrate. For every one species of mammal, there's two species of birds in the world today. So they are by far the most successful group of terrestrial vertebrates. But they, prior to this mass extinction event, that was not the case. There were other birds, a completely different group of birds that were the dominant flying terrestrial vertebrates. So they were around, but they were just not nearly as successful. And trying to understand that, understanding what changed about the world that allowed them to basically take over after this event, but kept them down before this event, is very poorly understood. And in order to answer those questions, we need fossils, but we just don't have
the
it.
fossil you found, so we found one, is what it sounds
We
like.
found a clincher. So
clincher.
prior to this discovery, this species, Vegavis, was known since the 90s, but we never had its skull. We had the entire skeleton almost, but not the skull. And if you're trying to identify anything, the skull is really useful, right?
Yes.
It's just there's a lot of features that help tell you exactly what that thing is.
And a beak is helpful with the bird,
Beak
right?
is helpful, absolutely, yes. You think of a duck, you think of the beak. If you think of a flamingo, you think of the beak, right? So the shape of the beak is very characteristic. We didn't have that. We didn't have any of the skull. We only had what was below the neck, basically. And there were enough little hints in the skeleton to suggest this might be a modern bird. But because that would mean it was basically the only one that we knew of, people were incredibly skeptical of those claims. And so research surrounding Vegavis as a species has been incredibly contentious. It's been incredibly controversial. People start fights over whether Vegavis was a modern bird or not. And then,
really?
Yes, and then we found this skull. It was.
And where'd you find it? Let's give some context.
So it was found in 2014 on Antarctica, and it was found in a football-sized chunk of rock on an island called Vega Island, which is where it gets its name, Vegavis. And this one locality is where all other records of Vegavis, the rest of the skeleton, had been found. And so this team that I'm a part of went with one of the major objectives was to find the skull, because we knew how important that is. Almost never, when you go on one of these expeditions, do you find exactly the thing that you're trying to find. It's all luck, right? You prepare as much as you can. You do a lot of research to maximize the likelihood that you're going to find anything of interest. But finding the piece that you're looking for is incredibly rare. But our team found it. And so when we brought it back, we spent a long time cleaning it off, preparing it so that anatomical experts could look at it and really diagnose what it was. And when we looked at it and we were looking at the beak, we were looking at features of the skull that wraps around the brain, which can tell us a lot about what the brain was shaped like. We just saw hallmark after hallmark of modern bird. It was crystal clear that there's no mistaking this for anything but a modern bird. which finally sealed the deal. Vegavis is definitively a modern bird. And now we can start studying it in that context. We can start studying it as a modern bird and better understand how this thing as an organism was living in a larger world and what details those might that context might provide us as to why modern birds survived when no other dinosaur, no other bird could.
So if you discovered it in 2014, you got a lot of notoriety this past year.
Yeah.
So was that all the verification that this is a modern bird?
So a big
That's
part
over a
of
decade.
Yes, a big part of most of that time was spent what we call preparing the specimen. So when we bring the specimen out from the field, we expose in the field, we expose just enough to verify we have an idea of what it is and that it's worth bringing home and spending time on, time and money. And then we leave as much left on it, rock, other stuff on it as we can because it's protection. It keeps it safe. So when we brought it home, then we began the process of preparing the fossil, cleaning it off, getting rid of the rock that was on the surface of this thing. And that took forever because it's painstaking work. And so we had colleagues at the Carnegie Museum who were physically, mechanically cleaning it off. That took an unimaginable amount of time. Once we got to the point where we didn't want to risk damaging the specimen, we CT scanned it, CAT scanned it. And then technicians at Ohio University spent a long time digitally preparing it using computer programs to clear away material from the 3D models that we built. And that provided anatomical experts like myself to begin the painstaking process of making sure we are analyzing things correctly, we're identifying things correctly, we're comparing this to the right birds to make sure that we fully understand the biology of what we're seeing. Because if we're going to step into a space and say, hey, there's a raging debate going on and we have answers that you're looking for, we better be confident that we have what we think. We need to do as much responsible science as we can. And so that entire process was incredibly painstaking. And so finally that came to fruition earlier this year when the paper finally came out announcing what this was and demonstrating our findings.
That's so exciting. And a long time coming.
Yeah,
long time coming.
Very long time.
We have two birds right here. Tell us how that relates to Vegavis.
Yes. So Vegavis is a close relative of ducks and geese.
We have a lot of ducks in the Central Valley.
Yeah. So it's like a second cousin to a duck. Very closely related, very similarly sized as a duck, but it did not live its life like a duck at all. It lived a very different lifestyle. So this is a specimen of just your classic duck. This is something you could go out and see in the Central Valley right now. You think of ducks as kind of just swimming along on the surface, just dipping their face in the water occasionally to get food. So that's the size of Vegavis, but Vegavis didn't live like that at all. It lived
small, relatively small.
Relatively small, yeah. So this is a grebe. It's very similar to a loon. So if you know a loon or a grebe, they look vaguely like ducks, but they live their lives completely separately, completely differently. Things like grebes, like this, they're adapted to using their legs to swim underwater in active pursuit of fish. Their beak is really long, really pointed, perfect for capturing fish. Their legs are shoved to the backs of their bodies in an adaptation to swimming underwater. Grebes and like this and loons can't walk. They're physically incapable of walking. They live their lives on the water or in the air. Vegavis was like that. It would have been physically incapable of walking efficiently at all. So it almost
even
never
has something so small.
Yes, because it's the way it. So when you think of a duck, when it's walking, right, its body is mostly horizontal to the ground. Its legs are kind of in the middle of the body. But something like a grebe, something like Vegavis, its legs would have been shoved to the back of its body. So instead of having its body horizontal, it would have been propped up vertically. And so it would have struggled to walk. And that's an adaptation of swimming underwater. And so when we looked at its skull was exactly like this. It had a long, thin, pointed beak that was perfectly adapted to moving through the water efficiently and snapping shut around fish in active pursuit. Completely unlike what we see in ducks today. So even though it was the size of a duck, relatively small, if you watched it living its life, you would not suspect duck at all.
And it had this beak. So this body and this beak.
This body, that head. Exactly.
So what do you hope to accomplish in the next step of now
Yeah,
that it is a modern bird, it's been
yeah.
discovered. What's the evolution of that research?
Yeah, so what we have demonstrated now is that we can use Vegavis, but also the area it came from. We can use
Which
that
was
as
Antarctica,
from
right?
Antarctica. Yes, this island. There's a set of islands off the coast of Antarctica. Vega Island is the one where Vegavis comes from, and it represents an opportunity to understand how life changed over across this mass extinction event. When we think of dinosaurs, we think of them being here and then they're not, they're gone. And then we think of other things kind of replacing them. Something that's harder for us to imagine, that's harder for us to model, is things that were alive before. How did they change in
Mm.
response to this mass extinction event? And now that we know Vegavis was a modern bird before this event, we can use this locality, this area, we can use Vegavis to start exploring questions about how does something that was alive before stay alive after? And what does it look like once everything is said and done?
And so will you be going back to Antarctica at
Yes,
some point in
that
time?
is the goal, is to go back to Antarctica. As you might imagine, Antarctica is a difficult place to get to
I
and a difficult place to stay alive on.
Yes.
And so it requires a tremendous amount of support, tremendous amount of money, and so it is a non-trivial effort to get back to Antarctica. And so myself and various other colleagues are beginning the process of figuring out what is our next big push going to look like, and what are our objectives going to be, where are we going to go, what are we going to try to collect. So yes, the goal is to get back, and that process is starting to take shape.
Would you want to go back to that same island? Do you think you could
Yes,
find more of
yes,
the Vegavis?
yes, without question. So this area experiences a lot of weathering. So over the course of a year, just due to weather, the surface of the area is shifting ever so slightly. And as the shape of the surface shifts, stuff below the surface moves closer to the surface. So we can
Mm.
come back to the same place over and over again. And it's like we're walking on entirely new rocks. And so
So
every
it's like
time
a
we go,
beach, right? Like going to the beach.
exactly,
Yeah.
yes, except it's slightly harder
Yes. And
and
cold.
a little bit colder. And but yeah, so our hope is to go back and find more of not only Vegavis, but more of the things that were around when Vegavis was there, to give us an idea of, okay, so Vegavis, we understand a lot more about it, but it was an organism living in a world. It had a world. There were things it hunted, things possibly hunting it, places it lived.
Mm.
We want to know what that world was like. So we want to go back and find data that tells us what that world was like.
Interesting. On a much lighter note, how is it living in Antarctica for a given period of time, and how
Yeah.
long were you there for this
Yeah.
expedition?
So the expedition I was on, so I was there in 2016 as a follow up to this. So because finding this skull was so monumental, we immediately realized we need to go back and we need to find more of this thing. So I went in 2016. I lived there for 30 days on Vega Island in a tent, and it was cold and windy. It was cold, especially for
Yeah.
California, not as cold as I think people imagine Antarctica being. It would regularly get down to below freezing, but where we went in February and March, which is austral summer. It's summer for the southern hemisphere, and at present, a very small percentage of Antarctica thaws in the summer. Ice recedes enough for us to go and walk around on the ground and look down looking for fossils. So by definition, we were going to the places where it had to be warmer in order for us to get access. So for us, around freezing was warmer. It was warm enough for us to do our job.
So tell us now. I'm curious that
Yeah,
you reference this.
yeah,
A typical day in the
yeah,
life of Chris Torres,
yeah,
paleontologist
yeah.
on Antarctica. Are you just walking and looking?
That is literally what we were doing. Yes. So
For like how many hours a day do you think
as
you do that?
many as we can. As long as
Really?
there's daylight, we try to be out there because again, it's so incredibly expensive and difficult to get there. We're not going to waste daylight. If it's light out and we can walk around looking for fossils, we're going to be doing it. And so that is literally what we are doing. Before we go,
Huh.
we do our research to make sure that where we are going is where rocks are exposed at the surface to the right age, the right environment, and that are known, as if possible, known to already have fossils. so that when we go, we're literally walking around, looking at the ground. It's like bird watching, but back through time. And we're looking down, looking for fossils, and we try to collect anything that we can find.
And you did that for 30 days.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Good for you, Chris. I don't
Thank
know.
you.
You have to be a very patient person. Patient person. What do you
Yeah.
hope to like discover? Like, what do you?
Yeah.
What will these discoveries do for us in
Yeah.
current time?
Yes. So I think it's super depressing, but it's real that if we want to understand the changes that are happening in the world today, the magnitude of how the climate is changing and the impacts that that change is going to have on living biodiversity, one of the best places that we can look in the past is 66 million years ago when Mount Everest struck the planet and caused catastrophic global climate change over the span of a geologic blink of an eye. And so what I and people like me are interested in is understanding when this happened before, who lived and who died, and for the ones that lived, how did they change, right? What was left of them when all was said and done? And so what we're hoping to understand is we're trying to better clarify the processes that play out as a mass extinction occurs, as catastrophic global climate change plays out. What processes are involved? Can we predict who's going to live and who isn't? And can we use that information to help mitigate the impact that our activity is happening in the world today?
This is a new, like I referenced at the top.
Yeah.
We don't have many paleontologists here at Pacific.
Sure.
How are you infusing
Yeah.
your great enthusiasm
Yeah.
for this field with
Yeah.
our students? How
Yeah.
can students become involved in what you're doing?
Sure. So in anything that I do, so because I'm new here, I'm starting to ramp up my research, and that's going to involve field work, like I've been describing, either domestically here in California, here in the United States, or internationally, either in Antarctica or other countries. So every phase of that will involve student participation, either graduate student or undergraduate involvement. But then once we find those things and we bring them back to the lab and we start analyzing, understanding those things, that will also involve student participation, helping to clarify what it is that we're looking at and trying to understand what it all means. All of that is going to involve student participation. And so everything that I do here is going to involve students as much as humanly possible.
That's exciting for them. Exciting for them.
Exciting for me.
It is. And I'm going to go into what one of your specialties. Yes. Let me go in a minute. But tell folks, they're curious. Okay, so we have a paleontologist here at Pacific. What do you teach? What courses are you teaching in our biological sciences?
Sure. So I'm a vertebrate paleontologist. I focus on vertebrates, birds especially. But that means I am a trained anatomist. Anatomy is my specialty. And so one of the primary courses I teach here is human anatomy. So if you come to UOP and you are pre-health of any kind, there's a chance that you'll end up in my human anatomy class, where I try to bring a very evolutionary perspective to understand, okay, here are the shapes and structures of the human body, but let's understand the processes that shaped those pieces. Everything about us is the result of evolution. And so let's understand it from that perspective. And then on that same theme, I also teach introductory evolution and ecology to first-year students, where I do the same thing. We're exploring the fundamental rules that we understand about ecology and evolution and how those things play out. And so I try to make it very clear that we as humans, we are a part of countless larger processes that are bigger than us. Those processes led to us being here, and those processes will continue to play out long after we are gone. And so I think if we are going to understand the world and ourselves, we need to understand our role in these larger processes. And so I try to bring that perspective to all of the classes that I teach.
You know, Professor Torres, my son is going to be a freshman next year at Pacific. Perfect. And he's a pre-dental student. So we're definitely going to recommend your
take my classes.
You should take your classes.
First year, take introductory evolution. Second year, take my anatomy class. It's going to be a lot of fun.
So we're going to switch gears here because, again, none of these specimens behind us were harmed. These are all, nothing was harmed here. But Professor Torres brought with him to Pacific these flamenco heads that are in a jar, which you referenced to me is the largest. Tell people, you think it's the largest in North America?
I have several of these. They are heads in formaldehyde, which is what this yellow liquid is. They are 3 different species of flamingos. This is a species that lives in the high Andes Mountains in South America.
Okay.
Incredibly remote. In order to get there, it's a 3-day trek through waist-high mud in one direction just to get to.
Have you done that?
I haven't, thankfully, but I desperately want to,
You desperately
because
want
I
to.
want to meet these guys in person.
So what is your fascination with flamingos?
It's their face, it's their beak. They're flamingos in
this right
general.
here?
Yes, they're so weird. They're the weirdest, in
Look
my
at this
opinion.
beak.
They're the
See the
weirdest
beak right
bird.
here.
And their beak is the weirdest part of them. And the way that they feed with that beak is unique among birds. Their lower beak is shaped in cross sections like this U trough shape, and their tongue is like a piston. It's incredibly large. It's a solid mass of muscles. In ancient Rome, flamingo tongue was a delicacy, and flamingos, which today, yes, because it's super muscular, and flamingos today are all around the Mediterranean. During ancient Rome, they almost were driven extinct due to overhunting by Romans who harvested them just for their tongue because they wanted to eat them. Their tongue is super weird, really strong. It's a piston. It pumps back and forth in their lower beak, drawing water into and out of their mouth. And they're
so like a filter.
It's a filter,
Yeah.
exactly. The margins of their beak are lined with these almost teeth-like keratinous structures that interlock and they form a filtration mesh. And that's how they feed. No other birds do anything like that. And I think that's fascinating. And I want to understand how that evolved.
And you referenced to me before.
Yes.
Also the color. So they
Yes.
also eat things and
Yes.
that we don't eat.
That we shouldn't eat. Yeah.
But they were all over the Pacific Northwest, and now they're no longer here.
Yes. So they so flamingos, they're filter feeders. They eat tiny little things, and one of their major food sources are cyanobacteria, often called blue-green algae, which are incredibly toxic. They produce toxins that are dangerous to most vertebrates. Very often, some folks may have seen this. Sometimes a lake will have an algal bloom of blue-green algae, and local governments will issue warnings telling people don't go swimming, don't take your dog swimming in those water bodies because that is toxic and it will kill you, it will kill your pets. That is what flamingos eat. That is that's their primary food source, is either that or things that eat that, like shrimp. And in addition to these toxins that they produce, these cyanobacteria also produce color pigments that happen to be pink. And so that intake of those color pigments are what turn flamingos pink. And so
that bacteria,
yes,
turning them pink.
Yes, the things that the bacteria make is what flamingos use to color their feathers and their skin.
Now that people know that, you're going to think differently when you're at the zoo looking at the flamingos.
That's the effect I like to have.
Yeah. Okay, so and what do you? So you're curious about flamingos, and you did research articles on them and everything?
So as a paleontologist, I study their fossils. And so when it comes to flamingos, when it comes to any kind of bird, if they do something weird, I want to know, where did that come from and what were they doing before they did that thing? And with flamingos, they've got this really, really strange beak. I want to know what came before this. And
so what came before this that you found?
That's an ongoing question. That there are, so 35 million years ago, there are things that have the proportions of a flamingo: long legs, long neck.
Oh yeah, there's right there.
Yeah, but their beak is straight as an arrow. It's not curved like a modern flamingo. It's completely straight, which means they were feeding in a completely different way. Same proportions, but feeding completely differently. And so we do not fully understand what they were using that beak for. We actually don't even have records of their lower jaw. Their fossil record, this is an ongoing theme with birds. Finding their skulls, the complete skull, is extraordinarily rare. So with these flamingos, even though they lived in flocks of hundreds to thousands, we almost never find their lower beak. Is
there a reason why we don't find like a?
It is unclear. We do not fully know. And so we don't know what the beak looked like. We don't know how they used it. And so part of my research is focused on understanding how did those early flamingos use their beaks, so that we can have an understanding of what the starting point was. If modern flamingos are the end point, the straight-beaked flamingos are the starting point. What was in between? And that's what a big part of my research is focused on, is understanding what changed to cause that incredible down curve of the beak that modern flamingos exhibit.
And so where would you go? Like, so you went to Antarctica
Yeah.
to discover the oldest modern bird school. Where
Yep.
would you go for the flamingos? Do you go anywhere, or do we
Yes.
have them in a jar now and they can just send them to you?
I wish it was that easy. I really wish it was that easy. So studying flamingos has taken me to some really convenient places.
Yeah, what's like the most fun?
The most fun, France. So for whatever reason, the most beautiful parts of France have probably the world's best record of the earliest known flamingos. That's just where they're from, is France.
Huh.
Very strange, but it's a great excuse to go to France. Slightly less ancient flamingos are found right here in California. They is as recently as tens to hundreds of thousands of years ago. Flamingos were all up the West Coast, all the way up to Oregon and Washington. They came inland relatively recently, tens to hundreds of thousands of years ago. The Mojave Desert was much wetter and greener than it is today. A lot of things lived there that don't live there anymore, including flamingos. And so, for whatever reason, the Mojave Desert is, when it's not unbearably hot, is a great place to go to try to find things that lived in the world that flamingos lived in.
Is that a place you want to go,
Yes.
Mojave Desert?
Oh, absolutely.
Where else has your research taken you in the world?
So I've gone to Madagascar, looking at the same time period as where Vegavis came from, that end Cretaceous mass extinction event. Madagascar is really interesting because it, as a landmass, has been isolated from other land masses for an incredibly long time, similar to Australia. That's why today Australia has such weird animals, because they've been isolated from the rest of the world for so long. Those animals had a chance to evolve in completely different directions than anywhere else in the world. Madagascar is somewhat similar. So a lot of really strange, weird animals lived there. And so I and some colleagues from Ohio University go there, and we investigate what those things were like when the world was on fire during this mass extinction event.
This is exciting work. I mean, do you wake up every day thinking, what could I find next? I mean,
Yes.
what motivates you?
Exactly that. It's
Yeah.
so people, I think there's a misconception that people who do what I do have these really sophisticated questions about the world. And we have some, but really it's just why is the world like that? Why are flamingos like that? That is as sophisticated as it gets for me.
So you're just curious.
Yes, that's all it is. And what I think makes a good scientist is figuring out how to take that curiosity and use it for something, and find, I'm interested in flamingos, but there's something about flamingos that is sparking that scientific curiosity. And if I can kind of drill in and figure out what it is, it's the evolution of the beak. It's why do their faces look so funny? How did that evolve? And that is, suddenly I've got research projects there. And so when it comes to doing science of any kind, it's just figuring out how to harness your curiosity. And so if anyone out there is interested in being a scientist, be curious. Just wonder, why is the world like that? Because those kinds of silly questions are why we do what we do.
How a lot of alumni are tuning in and watching this conversation. Have alumni ever been involved with your work? Have you ever integrated alumni?
Not yet, but I desperately want to. So just like with students, I try to bring in as many people as I can, to give anyone that I can an opportunity to engage with this, to see what it is that I see, to do what it is that I do, that allow me to engage with that curiosity. And so I am happy to bring in students and alumni in any way that I can, to provide them with opportunities to see the world the way that I see it.
We're going to learn a little bit more about you.
Yes.
But I wanted to ask you a few questions from our alumni.
Yes, sure.
Before we go into our Tiger Tales game. Shannon Carnes, class of 2015. Okay. Shannon, hi Shannon.
Hi.
From our College of Pacific. What was it like working in extreme conditions in Antarctica? Where will your research take you this year?
Yes, it was cold and windy. Something I have found is it's similar here, right? When it gets super hot here, you stop being miserable, because that's just how life is. It's the same when it's super cold and windy and miserable outside. If you know for the next 29 days, my life is going to be cold and windy, it becomes a lot easier to process, because you can't do anything about it. So you just learn to deal with it. So initially it's miserable. and then eventually you just become numb to it all. And most of that is not frostbite, but some of it might be. This summer, I'm going to be going to Montana, which is where a lot of what I do is. I'll be up in Montana looking at, again, the same age of rocks, 66 million years, a little bit older, to look at other dinosaurs that were around at the same time as Vegavis, which I think is something I think is really cool. Here in North America, in Montana, 68 million years ago, T-Rex was here. In Antarctica, exactly the same time, there was what was basically a duck. Same time. Ducks survived, T-Rex didn't. That's weird.
That is very weird. That is very weird. So you're going to Montana.
Yes.
That's great. A multi-part question from Jay Preston, class of 1969.
Wonderful.
From our Eberhard School of Business. What drew you to Antarctica in the first place?
Yep.
What other animals lived alongside this bird, which you're trying to find out?
Yes.
What kind of rock preserved it? Okay.
Yes.
And was it possible to determine the bird's cause of death or find viable DNA? Ooh, very Jurassic Park.
Oh, yeah, very Jurassic Park. Okay, so in order, what drew me there is the time. It's the incredible time span. The fact that we knew that this potential modern bird was already there, so we wanted to go back and find more, and where it is relative to other things. Moments in time captured in the rock record from that precise moment, 66 million years ago. The vast majority are in the northern hemisphere. If you look at a map, most land is in the northern hemisphere. So finding places that record that in the southern hemisphere, exceptionally rare. Antarctica is one. So we wanted to go. Other animals, a lot of fish. And so the answer to that question is informed by the next question, which is what kind of rock? So this rock would have formed in a shallow sea. So just off the coast of a near shore environment. So we're talking relatively shallow seas. The actual environment was what we might call a temperate rainforest. So at the time, 68 million years ago, think Pacific Northwest, think Tasmania. Very, very green, very wet, relatively cold. And so we're talking about an ocean, very shallow marine environment just off the coast of a place like that.
And so, just as a follow-up,
yes.
The curiosity of what other animals lived alongside. Yeah. So we have the T-Rex here,
yes.
right? And then a duck
yes.
way down there. How does that help provide clues
yeah.
about how the species
yeah.
lived or thrived?
Sure. Because it's the same pattern that we see in the world today. Some animals only live in certain places. It's the same as back then. Only some animals only lived in some places. And so understanding why they were there, not somewhere else, and why they survived there and not somewhere else. These are interconnected questions, and answers to some will help us understand answers to others. And so that's a big part of why we're interested in this area. Is this is the place that is recording modern birds before this event, and it's the place where they survived across this event. Why is that?
So we talk a lot about climate change,
yes,
right? And so how does that research kind of relate? Is there a parallel there?
There's a really depressing parallel, which is the fact that, if we're looking at monumental levels of climate change. The world is warming at a rate that we've rarely seen. And if we want to understand how are things going to respond to this catastrophic global climate change, we need to look in the past and when it's happened before. And one of those moments was 66 million years ago when this asteroid hit the planet.
So again, not knowing the specifics, but right back to your flamingo beak example, going from straight to curved is adjusting to the environment of that species in order to survive.
Yes, modern flamingos are adapted to living at really disgusting environments. They do not care about water quality. Doesn't matter about temperature. They can drink boiling water, salinity, pollution. They don't care. They eat toxic things. So they're adapted to living in gross places. We as a species are really good at making gross places. So if we want to understand how things today will adapt to an increasingly gross world, flamingos are a great thing to study.
Okay, I could talk with you about this all day, but we need to move on. We're going to learn about you. So this is our tiger tailspin. So tell us, I have some rapid fire questions.
Let's go.
First thing that comes to your mind.
Yes.
What is your favorite food?
Waffles. Breakfast in general, waffles in particular.
Waffles in particular?
Yes. Breakfast is a cuisine. I will die on that hill, and it is the best cuisine. Waffles in particular.
Waffles in particular.
Yes.
Okay. Who is your favorite musician / band?
I love punk rock. Social distortion is what I'm going to
Social
go.
distortion?
Yes.
So when you're out at Antarctica, are you
Yes.
listening to social distortion
Yeah.
as you're looking around the ground?
Yes.
You,
I mean, if we're looking at the result of massive destruction, right? Like, why not have something angry and aggressive?
you know what? There's a lot to that. Okay. What is your favorite movie?
Back to the Future Part Two.
Why part two?
It's better than one. It's I will die. This is another hill I will die on.
You're
It's a
talking on a
perfect
lot of
movie.
sources today.
I
Breakfast is
know.
the cuisine.
Yes,
Back to the Future Part Two.
I have thoughts and opinions. Back to the Future Part Two. Perfect movie.
Why?
One
Tell
is
me
great
why that's better than one.
because so if you like one, it's
Yes.
in the background of two. If you can watch two and it's happening in the background of two, it's phenomenal.
Okay, we're gonna agree to disagree.
Hoverboard, flying DeLorean.
Okay. What is you're new to campus?
Yes.
But what is your favorite place so far in your first year
Favorite
here?
place so far. This is going to sound like a cop out answer, but I promise
Is
it's
it the
not.
lab?
It's the lab.
Okay.
When you, so I'm fresh off the job market. When you're looking for a job in your brain, you're doing everything you can to not build your fantasy lab, right? Because you have all these thoughts, these dreams, these goals about what you want to do, and you're trying not to indulge that because you don't want to jinx yourself, you don't want to set yourself up for heartbreak, but you do it anyway. And now that I'm new here, I'm in the phase where I'm building that, right? I am building what I want my research to be. I'm building the environment that brought me in the first place. I'm trying to recreate that welcoming environment for students. And so this is my happy place. And so this is easily my favorite place.
Well, and you can't see on camera. There's a lot more specimens
There's a lot going
that
on.
Chris has in this lab to keep him busy. I think these conversations illustrate the outstanding faculty we have at University of the Pacific.
It's why I'm here, because they're here.
Yeah, and I just have to tell you, from a student perspective and an alumni perspective, you're going to add so much texture to an already outstanding biological sciences department. And I want to thank you for taking the time to talk with us about your research and about how that research is enhancing the visibility of University of Pacific.
Yeah, that's thank you for having me. And I will take every opportunity to talk about it too much.
Awesome. Well, thank you everybody for joining this edition of Pacific Conversations. Again, my name is Scott Biederman. I'm so happy you joined us today with Professor Torres, and we'll see you next month for our next edition. But until then, go Tigers.